Good evening, everybody. This is Sam Shihab with the law firm of Sam Shihab and Associates. We're going to talk today about the July Visa Bulletin. Specifically, we're going to be focused on the retrogression in the EB3, perhaps making it the most retrogressed Visa Bulletin potentially in the history of Visa Bulletin. I'm looking right here at a chart that outlines the retrogression all the way back to 2007, and I do not see a retrogression of how many years, Brian?
We are behind 14 and a half years.
14 and a half year retrogression. With me is?
Brian Burke, the very same Brian who just answered about retrogression. I think we have a good presentation tonight, Sam, on an unpleasant topic for sure.
Yes, and for everybody that doesn't know about us, we are from the law firm of Sam Shihab and Associates. We practice immigration law in the U.S. and throughout the world. And today we're going to talk about this incredible negative information that we've received from the State Department retrogressing the Visa Bulletin to the most retrogressed Visa Bulletin in the history of the record that we're aware of, that we can see when we come back in a minute. Well, the July Visa Bulletin is out, and this is officially a quarter Visa Bulletin. And
as we say that are typically more interesting, yeah.
As we have noted before, it appears that USCIS have been really focusing on the quarter release to make any significant changes, and we were expecting a significant change. And all what we have seen this year is retrogression upon retrogression, and we have gotten the release of the Visa Bulletin with the employment-based third preference for India retrogressed to January 1st, 2009.
Yeah, so that's
with no change in EB2. What do you make of it, Brian?
Yeah, I'll put it on the screen just so everybody can see sort of what happened there. Well, factually, it stinks. It is a huge retrogression for EB3 going back 10, 11, 12, 3.5 years, and then some. And, well, I guess a little bit surprising. You know, I guess, you know, there's been, like you said, there's been retrogression all year. And I guess everybody sort of hoped it would stop because it is kind of demoralizing. And I think, you know, part of our presentation here tonight is to basically try to understand it a little bit better and maybe pick it apart and see where USCIS is coming from, what's going on.
Yes, so I'm just looking at, so there is a 14 years and 2 months happened, Brian, in September 2019.
September 2019, that's a interesting.
But
yeah.
this one is how many, if you go back to that spreadsheet, I think, is it 13 years or? When we looked at that spreadsheet.
Oh, the how retrogressed we are right now in the EB3 category, 14.45 years is what we quick and dirty calculated
So clearly it's surpassed the worst retrogression that we know. So that's the only time that we saw a retrogression that extensive was in September 2019. And going back to 2007, we don't see a retrogression worse than the one that we were headed this Visa Bulletin, Brian.
Yeah, I guess that doesn't surprise me too much. I think everybody's been seeing the dates sort of, you know, creeping up over the last, several years. Well, it was, and then we had the October 2020 extravaganza, which, you know, reduced backlogs and did give away more visas than employment-based visas to especially people in backlog countries, India, than ever expected. So we think of it, Sam, we were up all the way up until January 2015, as recently as, well, the dates for filing got to January 1st, 2015 and October 2020, I believe it was, end of 2020. And now we're literally back 6 years prior to that. It is a bit of a punch in the gut.
How can they move something 5 years?
Well, let's talk about the interesting things that we see in the Visa Bulletin.
And I can confirm, as a matter of fact, we have gotten all the way to December of 2015, even moving, almost to the end of 2015. I see here in February 2020, I see movement even more.
Maybe I'm mistaken on my.
Yeah.
Well, point aside, it's a great big giant rollback.
Yeah.
So, let's you're talking about the whole scope of the Visa Bulletin, 14 and a half of the retrogression in EB3. Let's talk about the limited retrogression of 3.5 years that we saw on this July Visa Bulletin.
Mm-hmm.
U.S. I don't know if everybody reads this portion of the Visa Bulletin, but at the end of every Visa Bulletin, the Department of State puts interesting little notes, and there was a little note that on there that would sort of explain the nature of this retrogression, at least to me, and I'm going to put it on the screen for everybody to see right now, and I'll read it aloud for the benefit of the audience. So they say, India's EB3 number use has been consistently robust throughout the fiscal year, and it is estimated that the applicants chargeable to India will use all EB3 numbers made available to them during the fiscal year, taking into account the laws, by the end of June. Thus, applicants from India are subject to a final action date of 1st of January 2009. This situation will be continually monitored, and any necessary adjustments will be made accordingly. So, to simplify that big blocks of text into a much smaller sentence, they expect to be out of EB3 visas for India at the end of this month, June, that we are in right now. Now, one thing, so I guess that would explain why the dates go backwards. They can't take new cases because they don't have any visas to give away.
Yeah.
Right? Now, one thing that sort of, I obviously prefer, January 2009 than January 2008, 2007, et cetera, as in terms of, the guy who likes seeing people getting green cards. As an immigration attorney, though, I'm bothered by this. Why doesn't the Visa Bulletin say you for July 2023, Sam, if they think that they're going to be out of visas by that point?
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
It's incredible.
Well, for the benefit of the audience, if you look in historical Visa Bulletins, if they don't have visas available, they can say you for unavailable, meaning we're not taking any cases. I guess that's
usually unavailable. When I dealt with unavailable, I think is when they're calculating and they don't have information, so they don't know, they're not able to calculate a number. So there is a pause more so than anything, to my recollection. Now, in reference to the most forward retrogression date or Visa Bulletin date that you mentioned earlier, Brian, it is January 1st, 2014.
January 1st, 2014?
In October of 2021. Okay, and amazingly, we moved back 5 years.
Yeah.
How can we move back 5 years?
Well,
that is a big chunk of time.
Well, not just moving back 5 years, Sam. How do you move up 5 years in the first? Let's take a little walk back. So everybody knows the Visa Bulletin jumped forward in a massive way due to increased visa availability in October 2020, due to the failure to use visas at the consulates due to them being shut down due to COVID for the most of the year 2020 from March onward. So. Those unused family visas they weren't issuing the consulates flowed over into the employment-based categories, and massive Visa Bulletin movement forward in October 2020. Everybody started filing green cards. We worked a ton. Fun times. Now, so I guess, there are plenty of U.S. We're nowhere near that. I could have swore it was a 2015 date on the Visa Bulletin, but regardless as to what it is, we're nowhere near where we were on the Visa Bulletin in October 2020. And I guess that points out to me that it was probably a bad guess, a problematic Visa Bulletin in October 2020 for a couple of reasons.
That movement back and forth is serious. It's a serious movement. A gap of 5 years, that's a lot of visas. And we're trying to kind of get a handle on it, and you looked at some numbers. Let's do an overview of the visa availability numbers in this year, Ryan. We have a spreadsheet just to give people foundation on what are the numbers for the year.
Let me pull it up here real quick.
Yeah, that might help people kind of understand what are the visa numbers for the Is that,
Yeah. So
are we good?
I think we are if we stay on this. I'm not sure that that Excel session has a audio attached to it. So that's something I'm not sure about. So yeah.
All right. So anybody tell me has no hope? There's nobody commenting. So I think we're good.
Okay. All right. Sorry about
We
that.
keep going. Yeah. No, it's working.
Well, I'm sure it was.
We'll try that again.
Yeah.
Put that again. Let's just test it
Got
one
the
more
mouse
time.
cursor, please. Yeah. Sorry about that,
Yeah,
guys. We have a dispute.
Technical.
I just don't need the cursor in order to. There we go. So, that's
Okay.
there goes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. No problem. So in other words, so we have 3,940, 3,900 and some numbers of green cards available for EB2 India.
For last fiscal year. Yeah.
And there is zero spill over from EB1 to EB2 because EB2 and EB1 China and EB1 India are retrogressed.
Yeah.
So any available green cards from the rest of the world in EB1 has to fill these two EB1
Yeah.
areas. So no extra EB1 that goes to EB2, and never was extra EB2 that goes to EB3 ever, because on the EB2 categories from the rest of the world all get consumed by EB2 India.
Yeah.
Now, when you get to EB3, we used to get extras from
Rest of the world.
the rest of the world. These now are retrogressed.
Yeah, rest of the world is retrogressed. So, so I'll state it again. EB1 category, when the rest of the world is current, which it no longer is right now. Is that actually what am I saying? It's still current for the rest of the world. But in the EB1 category, there's still rest of the world still current, which means
Correct.
extra visas not used there are going to flow over to India EB2
No, it doesn't flow to India EB2 because it flows to India EB1.
Sorry.
across.
Yes, so flows across to India and China EB1 because they're both backlogged to the exact same date.
Precisely.
And if you imagine it like a gully in the ground, there's just not enough dirt to fill it up. Thereby, there's nothing to overflow down to EB2, and there's nothing to
Correct.
flow across in EB2 because EB2 rest of the world's backlogged, and so is every other country on the EB2 chart. So EB2, no extra visas available. EB3 has the same problem. There's no flow down from EB1 to EB2 or EB2 to EB3 right now because.
And EB2 to EB3 never happened before.
Yeah.
But what EB3, China and India benefited from is the rest of the world EB3 that was always current. EB2, EB3 India and EB3 China benefited from that until now. Now there are no benefits and no flow across. So the maximum this year EB3 India will receive is about 3,900 green cards.
I think you're still on last year's numbers though. You're on the 197,000. We're on we only have 100. Yeah.
No, this year we have 197,000. Yes.
Okay. Is it? All right.
Yes.
All right.
So with that, EB3 India is severely retrogressed. The most in history that I can tell, and the most we have seen is one time for 1 month retrogressed to 14 years and 2 months, and now we are beyond that, beyond the 14 years and 2 months retrogression, Brian, unfortunately, for EB3 India. Now, in terms of the impact of this retrogression going forward, if someone file an application today, perm labor certification application for India with a priority date of June 12, 2023, when do you think this person will get their green card?
Well, logic, if you approach it in a very linear manner, you'd say 14 and a half years.
Is it linear?
No, it seems to be creeping up. We have creeped to the highest point. Well, then again, Sam, it's slingshots. You know, it's slingshots ahead It was again as recently as 2 years ago. It was 5 year. It was 5 years ahead from where EB3 is today. You know, you're right. I googled it. I just googled it while you were talking there. It's 197,000 visas available for fiscal year 2023. I don't know why I was thinking that was the prior year's number.
That's
so.
Okay.
One thing that I wanted to tackle the same is what we've been hearing from USCIS this entire fiscal year, starting in October, is that the the retrogression in the Visa Bulletin is attributable to increased demand from the rest of the world. And it's been on my agenda to look into that to see whether there's anything to it. And doing that, I went to the USCIS data and sort of ran some numbers. And the numbers are reasonably interesting. So what I did is that USCIS publishes their I-140 data showing basically how many I-140s are approved in a given fiscal year.
You can take our picture off, Brian, so everybody
Let's take our picture off so everybody can see. There we are. So I basically extrapolated this data for the last for fiscal years 2019, 2020, 21, and 22, as well as the little data we have for the first quarter of fiscal year 2023. And my logic is that, you know, the last true normal year we had for USCIS numbers was fiscal year 2019, which would have ended in September of 2019, and that was pre-COVID, right? And I said, I'm going to go ahead and check the numbers for rest of the world visa usage, basically countries that are not India, China, Mexico, and the Philippines.
Right.
Right. And here are the numbers we got for total visa usage for the rest of the world for fiscal year 2019, excuse me.
So that number you're highlighting is 45,623, Brian.
Yeah, that's total approved I-140s for the rest of the world in fiscal year 2019. Right?
Including India and China.
That's excluding India and China, right?
Okay.
And so I just decided to just simply compare that, you know, against how we're doing in fiscal year 2022, the most recent year. And essentially the difference, there it is, 47,000 I-140s approved in fiscal year 2022 for the rest of the world.
It's not
a negligible difference, about 2,000, a little bit over 2,000 visas.
It's not very relevant.
Yeah.
Number. It was not a significant number.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, that answers the question. And for the record, I also did some data.
I'm sorry to interrupt you here.
Sure.
So you also have 2021 if you scroll slowly so people don't get a headache.
Yeah.
So 42,000 in 2021.
A little bit of a depression, probably due to COVID.
And then, so are they potentially talking, and there's 41,000 in 2020, are they talking about that jump from that 5,000 jump? Is this the significant increase you're talking about?
You know, I don't know. You know, to give credit to the Department of State, in more recent months, they have been very descriptive, more descriptive, I think, as to what's going on in the Visa Bulletin. But you're right, that's a good point. I was sort of just going back to what I thought would be a baseline year, you know, here in 2019. But you're right, versus 2020 and 2021, that's a 5,000 jump, and that's not just 5,000 visas, because that's 5,000 approved I-140s, right? And you have to consider that I-140 approved person. I'm going to put us back on the screen here for a minute. The I-140 approved person might have a spouse, and they might have a child. So my magic number I think is good is about 2.5. So if you multiply, you know, 5,000 times 2.5 is, you know, what, 12,000 and some change. 12,500 visas. I guess it's a pretty good chunk. So, but I guess the thing that gets me is if they are talking about this jump from 4,200 to 4,700 as being the big, you know, jump in visa demand, I don't see that as something they shouldn't be able to anticipate, because if I can go back and check I-140 demand from prior to COVID, shouldn't they be able to go back and check I-140 demand prior to COVID? Shouldn't?
But I see also here that the numbers, if you can go back to the screen, one more time.
Yep.
The numbers appear to also, to me, just looking at the numbers, Brian,
Yeah.
For India, there is a significant increase.
Well, you're looking at fiscal year 2021 though, which that's part of the whole. Hey, everybody.
So, but India, for example, in EB2 is 38,000.
Yep.
If you can click on that so people can see
Yep.
the box I'm looking at.
Yeah.
And then the increase here to 45,000.
Well, again, so if fiscal year 2021 is a very interesting year because remember, we filed tons of downgrades to EB3 category in fiscal year 2021 starting October 2020. So these numbers are incredibly wacky.
Completely wacky.
Yeah, so I mean there's 48,000 India EB3 approvals in fiscal year 2021. Then when the downgrade madness stopped in fiscal year 2022, it's down to 16,000, which is these numbers make sense to me. I think.
So do you think that? I mean, obviously, you're looking at these numbers to trying to figure out where is the rest of the world demand coming from?
Yeah.
Is this really a rest of the world demand, or is it just a bunch of baloney? And what you're telling me is there really isn't, because Brian, you've kind of these numbers. And I'm looking here to my left for everybody because the screen is to my left. If you can put that over there, that will probably help, Brian, if that's possible.
Oh, it is possible.
Okay, so
There we are.
Okay, thank you.
The scaling gets all
take it back.
all weird. Yeah.
So what you're telling me is you've subtracted China and India, and you came out with about a
Philippines and Mexico as well. Yeah.
$5,000 I-140s jump for the rest of the world.
Yes, if you want to compare against fiscal year 2021.
But they're talking about increased demand, so you got to compare that to the.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit of an uptick in the rest of the world.
Well, I guess so. But I mean, so that's about 12,000 visas.
Adjustments.
Yeah. 12,000 worth. Now, I mean, couldn't they?
A little bit, but not significant.
Couldn't they? Yeah. And I guess the question is, couldn't they see this coming though? Couldn't they? And
so, if they saw it coming, what changes would they make?
Well, if they see it coming, they'll do exactly what they did. Is retrogress is say, oh shoot, we're going to need these visas for the people who they were originally, earmarked for under the law, based upon their country of birth, whatever countries it's not, India or China or Philippines or Mexico or whatever country is backlogged, and they issue those visas to those people, and accordingly they would backlog them. So I guess if you're making the argument that this visa bulletin is right, I mean, yeah, there's something potentially to that. More visa demand, and the other thing we have to remind ourselves is there's less visa availability this year than we had versus fiscal year 2022, the massive amount that was.
We still have more. So if we end up in next year we're going to have even less green cards available, and which means more retrogression because we're not going to have this flow across from or spillover, I should say, is it the right term, from family immigration to employment immigration because the State Department is back on full capacity.
Yeah.
And I think they're going to completely approve all the I-140s for the family immigration, and therefore there will be no extra green cards, which means potentially more retrogression. And what you've done here, Brian, is with a 14-year retrogression, you have created now a scenario by which people, by the time they get their green cards, they're going to have gray hair.
Well, do they ever get their green cards? Because you and I are talking
under current law.
Yeah, you were talking about this. If we see like there's reports every now and again that says like somebody in the EB3 category is going to be waiting 30 years for a green card, and it creates this nightmare scenario. You get to a point where you are older, you want to retire, you cannot work, and suddenly you have a problem with your green card case because you're supposed to have an offer of permanent employment in the United States, and if you're retired, you don't have one of those. So either you retire, and if that RFE ever comes along, you don't have an answer because you can't work anymore, or just don't want to work anymore, or just aren't working anymore.
If you get sick.
That can happen to anybody. It's people. Everybody's entire life in the United States is on the line until that green card is in your hands, because we're immigration lawyers, don't count on it until the green card is in your hands. And that's, I mean, the worst scenario still is, people, if it gets worse and worse and worse, people can really be they're gonna die before they get their green card.
Is this now? Obviously, if you have an adjustment of status filed, you can continue to stay in the United States. And by the way, we have talked before about a lot of people say, don't file a second adjustment. Don't file a second adjustment. If you filed a second adjustment, so you have one in the EB2 and the one in the EB3, you are breathing a lot more than the guy who only has one adjustment. Why? Well, we've had crazy administrations before. With crazy administrations, crazy things happen. And unfair denials sometimes may happen. And with that, you're hanging on that denial of the adjustment of status your entire career. Now, if you have two adjustments, you have this other second adjustment that can keep you in this country and allow you to...
Well, yeah. You make the practical point that multiple pending adjustments is multiple paths to a green card. Having a pending adjustment of status allows you to stay in the United States. Great. I was thinking about, the wisdom in filing a second adjustment from a more practical, well, not a different perspective. So over the last, closing in on 3 years right now, the Visa Bulletin has zigzagged back and forth. EB2, EB2 moves ahead, EB3 moves ahead, and now think of it. Everybody downgraded to EB3 back in October 2020, and now EB2's ahead. People want to be in the EB2 category, and now they're asking the question, well, shoot, how do I get into the EB2 category? If you filed two different adjustment of statuses in the one in the EB2 and one in the EB3 category, well, congratulations. You don't have to worry about, do I have to do a transfer to underlying basis to get into the other category? You're in them both until USCIS makes a decision on one of your cases. So that's would be for me the I guess one part of the peace of mind for that. You're right, having multiple adjustments is great, but I get stressed out about is, okay, so is USCIS going to automatically do a transfer to underlying basis? Do I have to do another transfer to underlying basis? Can I withdraw the one I submitted previously? And is USCIS going to find a way to take more filing? I mean, because we know that transfer to underlying basis is a problem. They're not good at processing it. They came up with all these systems to do it over the last 2 years, and I can't help but I talked to somebody last Friday about, I filed in my I-140 in EB3 even though I could have done in EB2 because EB3 dates were ahead. How do I get in the EB2 category right now? Well, it's another I-140 filing, and there you go.
With the creation of the most retrogressed Visa Bulletin that I know in my memory, I think it is the most retrogressed Visa Bulletin ever, have we created a second-class citizens, people who will live a lifetime here legally, travel, work, live, have children, but not become citizens ever.
Yeah, we were talking about a scenario. If
Is that the official creation of this new class of citizens in this country?
The theory being that, if your priority date never becomes current, you never get your green card, you just left here forever, your adjustment of status in limbo with no permanent residence, let alone the opportunity to get to citizenship. If the backlog keeps on getting worse and worse, and the people who had close priority dates are seeing it slowly slip away, it does seem it's something that, unless something's done, cue our past discussion, Sam, of last week on immigration reform, which doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Yeah, I guess I have to, that's my long way of saying, yes, I agree.
And the second question I have, is it the death of the Child Status Protection Act? Because children now will have to eventually get married. They cannot wait 20 years unmarried. And the moment you gets married, you lose the child status protection. So your child turns 21, they're single, and maybe they're protected under the Child Status Protection Act.
I see what you...
And then when they're 25, then 28, then 29, and then say, Dad, I got to get married. The moment that child gets married, Brian,
they're no longer eligible to get a green card through their parents.
So this retrogression also probably is spilling the death of the Child Status Protection Act as well.
Yeah.
So if you have an adjustment of status filed, let's talk practicality here. We're talking philosophically, let's talk practicality. If you have an adjustment of status filed, You can renew your advanced parole indefinitely. You can renew your EAD indefinitely. If you have two of them, I think I would love, I mean, maybe the government is going to back off not issuing double advanced parole, but you went out because it takes a year to get an advanced parole.
Yeah.
So maybe you straggle them. And don't travel without an advanced parole, and plan your travel based on the processing time of the advanced parole, and sue them for delays in issuing the advanced parole, because now you're here for a long time if you have a pending adjustment of status.
Yeah, I mean, on advanced, people should sue on things like that, because one thing's for sure: if the government can get away with something with no consequence, they will do it. The classic scenario that I think of is the H-1B baloney that they engaged in for about a decade before getting slapped down by a court in October, sometime in June of 2020.
Right.
They will do what they want. They will say, we're the agency, we have the authority, until they're told not. And sometimes the only way that you can do that is through a court.
And the problem we have, which I don't get an answer for, as long as we have, I know there's debate on that number, 700,000 H-1Bs filed, and the pressure to come to the United States is so high, the incentive for the government to do reform is less. When they're slapped with 50,000 H-1B applicant on an 85,000 application because there's no realistic path to green card, and Australia, England, Germany, Canada, and other countries giving better options for their future, they're going to say, oh, nobody wants to come here. Let's look at the problem, fix it. But as long as we're having 700,000 H-1Bs coming in every year, why anybody gives a damn?
It sounds like you described a problem that nobody will care to fix. And again, it was last week's presentation. It's what's the status of immigration reform, executive summary. It's a good watch, but fat chance was what we were really kind of left on.
Yes. And also, I mean, we haven't talked about a lot of the other stuff that are very important. For example, there may be an increase in numbers a little bit in I-140 adjustment, 5,000, but that it absolutely does not relate to a movement back of 5 years on the Visa Bulletin. It doesn't follow.
Well,
that is a 5 years. That's, do the math. That is a lot of green cards that they're moving back.
It's five. I mean, just a year we see that the rest of the world, they had all countries in fiscal year 2022, for example, 149,000 I-140s approved, plus their family members. That's a ton of visas. Is 3.5 years versus it's hundreds of thousands of visas.
The administration needs to immediately decouple the family numbers from the 140,000. They have to say that these are never meant to, and then somebody, I mean, there has been theories that the administration without Congress can go back and administratively recapture some of the lost adjustments in the past, 20 years plus, and do something to fix this, because we're not heading in the right direction, Brian.
Yeah, it's. I guess the last thing I said on the subject is, the visa availability is what it is. And I give kudos to USCIS and Department of State for like fiscal year 2022. They got all their visas out the door. They used the visas, the employment-based visas. They did. But still, their poor ability to predict these things, and which is manifest in massive swings back and forth in visa bulletins, generates an unfairness. Because first of all, the law says that you're supposed to issue visas in the order in which
they're filed.
In which they're filed, and
that's not happening.
It's not. No, tons of people who said, I had a priority date X. My friend with a date further ahead of me got a green card, and I'm still here twiddling my fingers. And fundamentally, that happening says that they moved the visa bulletin too far. They approved cases that shouldn't have gotten approved, and somebody else is kind of getting screwed underneath the law. And having green cards, put close, having that priority date be close, or that green card, a theoretical possibility when your date was current, and have it being snatched away, it's I don't know, emotionally abusive to people. Yeah. It hurts, and we know because we talk to people.
We have 600,000 H-1Bs right now, that approximately, that this country renews every year. 600,000 is the number I last recall.
Yeah.
Okay. With this retrogression, what you need is I-140, and a year after that, with a retrogression, you can get indefinite H-1Bs.
Yeah.
So I can see also the number of H-1Bs in this country mushrooming to 800,000 plus. Maybe reaching 1 million.
If your conservative advice is to maintain your H-1B status, if you want to protect your strongest protection, have one adjustment, have 2 adjustments, have another H-1B underneath it.
So you may have 1 million H-1Bs in this country, 1 million potentially in the next 5 years, unless the problems.
Ability to stay here, multiple grounds to stay here indefinitely, perpetually, but never the means to truly get permanent residence until visas magically become available, until you get a COVID equivalent to perhaps, which I don't want to move the dates forward, or a massive change in law, which again, our executive summary of last week is, I don't see either side budging on that. You were talking about a great compromise is required. My take is I don't see it happening anytime soon. Yeah. And I can't see one side getting total control of Congress and the executive office to make that happen either.
So here it is, the most retrogressive visa bulletin in history. This time, and when we come back, we're going to answer your questions. All right, so we are going to take your questions right now. Just remember, don't rely on what we tell you to make a decision in your case. Hire an attorney or consult with an attorney of your choice before you make a decision on your immigration case. There's no attorney-client relationship established because we're answering a simple question. And these are good discussions we have to give you some general ideas of the issues that you may be facing. And it's a pleasure that we do it every week. To help you out. And without further delay, let's jump in and take the first one, Brian, from Praveen.
So Praveen asks a classic question, not the specific details, but a classic iteration. When will EB2 come to November 2012? So obviously, I guess that's when Praveen's priority date is, and if the final action dates were in November 2012, meaning he would be eligible to actually receive a green card in his hand. We are final action dates for July 2023. We are nearly 2 years off current for November 2012.
Stand still, I think, for right now, because next year is going to be even. I don't think he's going to move back. But I don't think he's going to move forward for a while.
I don't expect a great leap forward in the beginning of the next fiscal year, which will begin in October. But I would be, you get a better idea of where things are going in the beginning of the fiscal year because they know visas are going to be available at that point. So let's look forward to our October Visa Bulletin, which is not too far off, I suppose. We're just 3 months off from an October Visa Bulletin.
Yep. All right, from BR, can you please provide your guess on where will EB2 India date move in October of 2023? Visa Bulletin, new fiscal year. Well, I hate to guess under the environment, but my guess, Brian, is no forward movement.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that's a conservative guess, and I kind of want to agree with it, and I'll explain why. They put the Visa Bulletin, prior to this month, EB3 India was in June 15th, 2012, right? And suddenly, and that to me, it's a very simple thing. It means, we think we have visas, we think we have everybody up until middle of June 2012 taken care of, and suddenly they come back, 3.5 years. There should be new visa availability in October, but just because they are leaving the Visa Bulletin at a certain point doesn't necessarily mean that they have visa availability locked down at that point. So, yeah.
And I don't think they know what they're doing. I mean, when you move to 3.5 years, they don't know what they're doing. I mean, you cannot tell me that in 3 months, right? The last. I mean,
well, just in 1 month from last month to this one.
I'm going to give them a break. Yeah. They really are not looking at them, except quarterly. Yeah. I mean, that's my conclusion. That's my personal opinion. But you cannot in 3 months move at 3.5 years. Unless you're not looking at numbers right, or you're finding errors in your calculations. I just don't see how this is a smooth formula or an analysis that's considered and careful. I think it's haphazard. I think it's random a little bit, and there's a lot of guessing going on.
I think that no matter what, big giant movements in visa bulletins, I guess you could, if they can happen in cases of massive new visa availability, but otherwise, a big swing means either you made a bad prediction in the past or you're making a bad prediction now, and this is a correction for it. And I guess maybe this is supposed to be a correction, but yeah.
So one of the reform bills that was introduced this year, Brian, is talking about 10-year wait is the limit. Remember that? Remember that?
Yeah.
So they're saying once you cross 10 years, you should get a green card. It doesn't matter.
Isn't that sick? How that's now sounding like a positive prospect. Only 10 years.
14 years.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
It sounds better than 14 years.
And I mean, what they're going to do next time? Retrogress it another 3 more years for 17 years. Who's going to apply for a green card? Who's going to come to this country? Next question.
Yeah.
Is there any chance this data will reach to 2014 end of near future?
Well, again, EB3, you're 5 years off of that. Really,
it never got to 2014 ever. By the way,
yeah.
I mean, if you're talking about EB3, EB3 never got to that date ever. So
EB2, you're still 12, 13, 14, almost 3 years off of that. So the near future, no. Near future, 1 year, 2 years, no. I don't see that as the numbers are right now. I don't. You know, Sam. Here's a crazy thing though. Visa Bulletin just retrogressed 3.5 years. That number is. Those numbers aren't so crazy. I don't blame somebody for asking that question.
But you know, also just to kind of highlight, Brian, I don't believe EB2 ever reached end of 2014. They reached December 1st, 2014, but did not reach anything beyond that ever before that I can tell. But maybe I could be wrong. For India, I don't see it. I'm looking at charts here, historical charts, and I don't see. I see December 1st, 2014, holding up as of July.
That's a final action date. That sounds very familiar to me. Yeah. It reached that final action date, and I think the dates for filing actually reached January 1st, 2015.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So from BR, my priority date is March 2012, EB2. That's not so impossibly far. Okay, it's kind of about a year and some change off. But filed my I-45 in November 2022. If I, primary applicant, received my EAD and AP, that's pretty good, getting the EAD and AP since November. However, my spouse has yet to receive her AP. There's the other shoe dropping. That sounds more normal to me. We currently have H-1B, H-4 stamp valid until July 2024. We are planning to go to India for 1 month vacation, and we are planning to use H-1B/H-4 stamp at the port of entry. Can you please confirm the dependent's AP will be rejected/abandoned? Per the policy, the last policy that USCIS says that if you have a pending AP and you don't have a valid AP and you travel during the pendency of that AP application, your AP will be denied.
But someone reported on our YouTube channel last week.
Yeah, and I was talking to somebody else about maybe the same person on the phone, but a different person who had that same sort of scenario where they had to travel and it approved. That's a policy, that could disappear as soon as.
Well, it must disappear. It's just absolutely adding misery on top of misery. Yeah. This policy must disappear.
When did that policy appear? Is it? It doesn't matter. But you're right. I do agree with you in principle that it needs to.
But right now, there is no indication that USCIS formally is going to abandon the policy of abandonment if you leave the country.
Yeah.
Yes. If yes, I just need to reapply, right? Correct. Any impact on the pending 485? No.
Well, I worry about the nightmare scenario where if you can't get an H-4 visa, that your spouse.
You're abandoned.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest fear. Is, for example, there is an unfortunate denial of the H-4 at the consulates. then that's an abandonment of the I-485.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't like to travel without an advance parole. Now, the law is very clear. If your spouse leave on an H-4, get an H-4 stamp, and you get an H-1B stamp and return back to the U.S.,
The same employer
your
policy,
I-485 is preserved and there are no abandonment. However, if the consulate denies the H-1B or the H-4, then you might be dealing with an abandonment problem.
Yeah.
All right.
From Baguio BN.
Take it, Brian.
I'm on F1 visa, worked for my employer for 1 year, had 2 years to stint with PT left. Would it be a good idea to start my perm slash I-140 process? What's the chances of approval given that I'm on F1? So a great question. So I think Baguio brings up the issue that, as a student, somebody on F1 status, you're not supposed to have immigrant intent, the intent to immigrate to the United States. I'm sure that's what they're kind of looking for when you interview for a student visa. Well, Sam, what are the chances of approval of an I-140 when you're on F1 status?
Well, perm first.
Oh, perm slash I-140.
So let's talk about perm first. So perm is not an immigrant intent.
Yeah.
So
agreed.
if you're an F1 student, you're not violating, you're not violating your status. You can travel, and if you're asked at the border, at the point of entry, or at the embassy, have you ever filed for an immigrant visa, you can in good faith answer, no, I have not, even though you have a perm labor certification pending for you. So that's good news. It's not an immigrant intent, and you're good. I-140, however, is a little bit different. The moment you file your I-140, your employer really files your I-140. It is considered your immigrant intent, although you didn't file it, your employer filed it. And you will not be, you are risking not being allowed to enter the U.S. on a student visa.
Yeah, anytime you just sort of request F1 benefits, like the entering the country, you're subjecting yourself to the risk that you might not get that approved, essentially.
Yes.
So a question here.
Will this mean family-based F1 and F2B visa categories move ahead finally? Unrelated, but I think there's an indication that the family-based F2B is going to retrogress next year.
Yes, on the Visa Bulletin. So just like for those who don't know, just like employment-based visas, there's a Visa Bulletin half that's for family-based categories, and there is retrogression across essentially on the July 2023 Visa Bulletin. There's if you look at the final action dates, everything in the family preferences are retrogressed. And that's that. And F2B is the unmarried sons and daughters of permanent residents, and F1 is the unmarried sons and daughters of U.S. citizens. And those are categories which I don't expect to move, generally don't expect to move very quick at all. I know they've been extra slow due to the closures of the consulates over the last couple years due to COVID, though. I guess it's the bottom line. Those visas were not getting issued, and they're moving over to the employment-based categories as per the law.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
Has USCIS started issuing not selected notice for H-1B registrants from your firm for fiscal year 2024? I'm trying to gauge the chances of second lottery happening. Brian?
It is an impossibility for them to start issuing, okay, I guess they could in theory start issuing not selected, but the filing window for those H-1B cap cases hasn't even closed yet, and I presume that they won't be sending those out until they're very comfortable they've used all 85,000 and some change-ish visas, or however many H-1B visas, likely about 85,000 that they have available this year.
So we don't anticipate that happening before end of June and even beyond.
Yeah, I mean, in past years, like they had that second round of selection in August. I think it's either seems likely it's sometime in August. They're either gonna take in those. They're gonna either do a second round, or say, hey, we're done, because it takes them to receive all those selected cases and actually process them in order to figure out whether or not they need any more. Right?
Yeah, and that's going to take a long time.
Yeah. Would EB3 rest of the world become current by October? So this is where I have to go back and refresh my memory as to where EB3, the rest of the world. EB3, rest of the world, final action date for July 2023 is 1st of February 2022. It is, backlogged by a year and about 4 months. Yeah. That sure is a lot of distance in terms of retrogression, but I'd say yes. Clearly, there's potential for movement in the rest of the world categories in October.
Well, there's definitely going to be forward movement, but there's probably not likely, not guaranteed to be current.
I'd say, but if you have a Visa priority date, that's,
The question is, if these things move 1 year for 1 year, adding 1 year of visa availability is not going to move it, something that's backed up a year and a half.
Yeah.
That's the only analysis I have.
Yeah.
But it may not be 1 year for 1 year.
Yeah.
But it could be worse, which means even more supportive,
more
supportive of my
increasing,
position.
Yeah.
So I am skeptical that it will become current. However, I believe there's going to be significant movement, maybe slashed in half at least the dates.
So,
but it's a total guess.
This is Sriku raising what I raised. In July Visa Bulletin, they say EB3 India quota is all used up by end of June. Are we going to see visa unavailable in August Visa Bulletin? So Sam, how do you,
so unavailable, I mean, again,
it's usually some sort of,
calculation.
Weird happening that results in unavailability.
Yeah, that means we're calculating numbers and we cannot give you a date yet. So when I saw unavailability throughout the past is a situation where information is incomplete, scenarios that are kind of in flux.
The last I remember seeing in the Visa Bulletin is when they suspended the EB5 Regional Center program. I think they left those U's saying, oh, well, that program's suspended. We don't know what we can do.
In 2007, it was unavailable when USCIS pulled all the numbers in the middle of the year. So that's when they made everything current. I don't know if I have 2007 data.
How do you feel, Sam, about USCIS using all of the EB3 India visa availability by the end of June when they still have essentially another quarter left, July, August, September in the fiscal year?
Well,
is it problematic in any way? I literally don't know.
Oh, extremely for me.
Why is that?
Because it further affirms the fact that their management of these visa number is absurd. You have to release quarterly, every quarter you have to release a certain number such that by the end of the year you use all of them. The fact that they are approving, that they're running out early tells me they have no management of these numbers. So, I mean, to me, but I mean, I like the fact that they're processing more than they're
processing. Well, they're using them up. That's good.
But that creates. Here's what it creates. At least in my way of looking at the numbers, what that creates is a situation where you're approving too much India. You should be working on the rest of the world, so you don't have this inequality. Clearly, you're not approving it on first in, first out.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. Because when the Visa Bulletin jumps from for EB3 June of 2012 to January 2009, I think. So was there somebody out there who, with a priority date of May of 2012, who got their green card? And if there's anybody else during that period with a priority date who didn't get their green card while their priority date was current, they should be angry because they're going out. It's very clear that they're going out of order.
So you get. I'm looking at the calculation. Approximately, and I don't have approximately 3,800 green cards available this year.
Yeah.
For
any
EB3 India, based on this 28% limit and the 7%
country limitation.
Approximately 3,800.
Yeah.
You divide that by 4, so there's 950 adjustments per quarter should be approved for EB3.
Yeah.
Only 950, and absent of flow across whatever.
Yeah.
If you are going to have no massive swings, you have to be disciplined in how many you approve in general. You should not be under approving or over approving by the end of every quarter. because your energy, if you're approving things by June, you run out. Okay, and then now you turn all your attention to the rest of the world. Now the rest of the world number is going to increase, and then visa available for India, October 1st. Then you approve them all in a few months, and you stop, and that was going to give you this massive shifts in Visa Bulletin because you're not consistent. So to me, it's just a matter of just total lack of management of numbers.
Yeah, it seems like, well, I mean, part of it, I guess, has to be due to they had to take some action in October 2020 when visas became available. And what they did is you just sort of swamp and knock the pendulum one direction. And it's been teetering back and forth ever since the last couple years in terms of visa availability.
Yeah. So did we, so here there was a follow-up. Is July Visa Bulletin, they say EB3 coded, you already talked about that. And there was a follow-up question here or a statement. Is it legal to use all green cards so early in the year, almost 3 months before the end of the year? So it's not, when you talk about legal, are they, it's not illegal, or are they in compliance with the regulations? The regulations gives them a wide latitude. Last time I read it in the green card, the bright line that they cannot do is approving more green cards by the end of the year. And unfortunately, there is no law that says you cannot approve less than. There's a law that says you cannot use more than Congress gave you. But there's no regulation that says you cannot not use.
That bothers me because there's laws accounting for them not using that tells them what happens to them. They go away. But when it comes time, when occasionally they overissue, we occasionally maybe touch wood for somebody get a letter from USCIS that says we gave somebody a green card who they shouldn't have. It's always a terrible process. They have clearly they don't have much clue what they're doing, and it's always a strange and odd negotiation to undo
and
that.
Waste of time and resources where they've dumped 65,000 green cards 2 years ago, not used them, and somebody get approved by mistake extra one, and then they waste what could have been approving 10 green. It's just now they're jumping on this guy as if he stole something and treating him like SHIT.
The concept that we wasted 65,000 green cards a couple years ago. During this year where we used them all, we may have approved a few too many. Let's go
after those guys.
Let's go
grab those guys.
Let's get the error correction unit out there. Yeah.
So Praveen, he has no hope with green cards.
There's a first half of the question.
Go for it.
Clarification from my brother. His priority date is EB2 November 2012. He's planning to work on a secondary job, green card EAD, and maintain his primary job on H1. Is it possible to do it? So,
no.
Yeah.
You cannot work on EAD, and you can maintain your H1B job, but you're not working on H1B. You're no longer on H1B if you use your EAD. Now you can leave the country and come back and reclaim on your H1B with a stamp, but you cannot work on EAD for one job and H1B another job. It's oil and water, they don't mix.
Exactly. It's possible, some people don't know this, it's possible to do a concurrent H1B if the second employer is willing to file an H1B that says, so-and-so is going to keep on working for the other employer, but work for me, 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week, definitely possible.
Which is in theory, yes, and we see very few of those because the fee to do that is ridiculous, and it's just not practical.
That's for sure. So from Pranav, is USCIS going to introduce premium processing for EAD and AP since they put it through a commenting period? There's a recent announcement for I-131 online filing for certain applicants.
Well, yeah, they said they are going to introduce it within the next decade. They gave a timeline for themselves that was ridiculous, and then stopped talking about it.
Yeah, I remember. Pranav is right. There's some sort of thing that's saying, here's our time frame for introducing all sorts of premium processing. I remember seeing things like, 2025 in there, which is still a long time from today here in 2023. And this was announced, probably sometime maybe late 2021, early 2022, last we heard about.
So we'll take a couple more questions since we hit 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
I entered the United States on my 2013. Later, 190 days, I apply for asylum. I can go.
I can't go
My home country.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you joining us, but you need to consult with an asylum attorney that can help you up. Obviously, you apply for an asylum, so you should be allowed to stay in the U.S.
Yeah.
As a pending asylee. I mean, they give you the right, but that's a complicated area of law, and I don't know enough about your case to answer it.
Yeah.
Let's take the next one.
Yeah, from Suresh M.
Yes.
Do we know how many I-45 applications still pending with USCIS, both EB2 and EB3 India? So.
Information is not out, Brian. We need a lawsuit to get this information out of them.
So they don't say about I-45 applications, but they do have a report that's available on the USCIS statistics page that talks about how many I-140s approved waiting for visa availability. So that's kind of the closest thing I think to that.
But that's
it's not I-45. It's
Yeah.
I-140s, which is kind of something I looked at when we were running our numbers for this presentation. So
can we file a lawsuit to recover visa numbers allotted to people who had priority dates of 2014 but were issued green card before priority date 2012? When there is no visa number is available, there's no visa number is available. I find this lawsuit to be infinitely complicated with very little hope of making any difference, although clearly there's a breaking in the law.
Yeah, I mean,
not following the law.
Yeah.
What's your feel on that, Brian?
I feel for the people who have, historically prior to October 2020, how much would the Visa Bulletin move in a month? It would be like, a couple of weeks, and we'd file, an adjustment of status, a couple adjustments of status, every couple months, and that's the way it would go. And if they did that in 2020, October 2020, and just inch the Visa Bulletin along, people would have got green cards in the right order, arguably. However, and they went too far ahead, and that's why we got all these massive swingbacks. I understand why they moved the Visa Bulletin ahead so far, because they knew they had to take cases in order to get cases approved. But what irritates me is they took all those cases and they still managed to waste green cards. What they should have done is approved everybody. They took too many. The bottom line is they clearly took too many cases. That's why people have green cards pending. I don't know. They really should. What at some point, Sam?
Can you file a lawsuit on that?
I don't see that as a lawsuit that I can imagine crafting. It seems difficult. I think the court would say, well, what can we do?
What remedy?
Yeah, what can we do? What remedy do we have for that scenario?
With that, we want to thank you guys for listening to us. We will come back next Monday at 6 o'clock and either continue the discussion on this topic or come out with a topic of an interest to you guys, and as usual, take your questions in the second half of the hour.